this panel, which is second year of having a panel on technology ethics. This year we're focusing on AI ethics, and we have a wonderful group of panelists here that I feel pleasure to be the moderator. I'll introduce myself in a few minutes because I'd rather we start by the real people in the room, the panelists. And we'll start maybe from my left.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kara Cashin. I'm an associate professor in psychology here at UofL. And I am interested in this topic in part because I study babies, cognitive development, and there's a lot of overlap in the way that AI might learn, just as babies might learn. I'm also interested in this topic because of the human-tech interaction and the effects of tech on humans. And I teach a class on the psychology of social media, and we spend a lot of time talking about the ethics, ethical issues that come up with human interactions with technology, mostly based on AI. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Randy Whetstone, Jr. I'm a clinical assistant professor in the College of Education and Human Development. And so my teaching areas and focus is on diversity in the workplace, as well as anti-racism and organizational partnerships and community engagement. And so this topic really interests me because while anti-racism is becoming a new term that we're learning in our nation, it's important to understand how these ideas really kind of are embedded and work their way in the tech industry. And also thinking about major tech companies and the work that they do to better engage with marginalized communities in and around our nation and our world as well. So a pleasure to get the chance to share with you all this afternoon.
All right. I'm Kaylin Kinney. I'm a PhD student in the experimental psychology program. And I'm interested in this topic because I have worked on projects in the past that have humanoid robots and human interaction and cognition, and so human interaction with AI in general is an interesting topic to me. So I'm excited to talk about this today as well and the ethical concerns surrounding it.
Hi, I'm Guy Dove. I'm a professor in the philosophy department. My primary area that I work in is cognitive neuroscience, but I'm really interested in the way that technology is part of our cognitive niche. And I also teach a class on the philosophy of technology, so I've become very much interested in this topic. And I've also served on the academic discipline committee, so I've become interested in some of the ways in which technology has affected the job we do as professors.
Roman Yampolsky. I do research on AI safety and security in the computer science and engineering department. I usually teach a course on artificial intelligence, which includes a large ethics component. I concentrate on more security aspects of it, which means I'm very concerned and interested about future of this technology. So future of AI, 5 years, 10 years from now, how it's going to impact society, economics, employment, everything. Not just what AI can do for you, but what it can do to you as well.
Well, thank you. And maybe I'll make a brief introduction about myself. My name is Adel Maghrabi. I'm a professor of computer science and engineering, the same department as Roman is, so that was a circle that came back to me. And I've been teaching in computer science and engineering at UofL for 40 years. I got interested in AI in the early 80s when AI was a little nascent. I mean, although it started way earlier. And I have a lot of work and applications in things related to health care and cybersecurity, and both are areas that are very kind of relevant to our developments, ethical or not ethical. And I will stop at this. I also work with the Digital Transformation Center. I'm the research director for the Digital Transformation Center who's setting up this panel. And we want to thank all the sponsors who helped this panel happen. And we'll get started with some questions. And I will have the questions rather than in order pop up. The one who wants to answer first can answer instead of just going exact order. First question, some of you may have already answered it, which is how does this ethics relate to your academic discipline? If you want to expand on this, or because your introduction may have kind of cut on this, please pop up. Okay.
So one of the things that's interesting, I think, is that we have these emerging technologies with language models. And we've just had, a year ago, the introduction of GPT-3, which is an improvement. And one of the things it's able to do is to create text from very limited parameters given to it. And one of the worries, of course, is that as professors, we assign papers. And one of the things that GPT-3 can do is generate a pretty good undergraduate paper. And I think the technology is only going to get better. And so this is going to raise issues with regard to how we assign things and grade things and look at things. I think a good analogy can be made to the controversies going on in chess right now. So initially, the worry was whether we could create a software that was sufficient to beat a grandmaster. But once that was done, now we have the ability for people to rely on softwares and AIs to create an instance where it's possible to cheat in an effective way. So the current controversy between Magnus Carlsen and the accusation for Hans Niemann, who has admitted to cheating in the past, but apparently not under certain conditions, is that you can have communication with somebody paying attention to the AI, and that can give ideas, and if you're enough of an expert, then you can figure out what move to make under certain conditions. It's interesting that people actually use, like experts in chess now use the software to come up with new moves. Like it used to be all you did was you would study old moves, and then you'd become an expert through applying your knowledge gained from games in the past. But now what people do is look at AI moves and try to improve their games that way, because AI can do things in a different way. Well, the same thing can apply to language models. You could get good ideas for writing papers or creative writing through using an AI. And this is a real interesting conundrum. How do we deal with this in the future in academia?
Thank you.
Can I jump in?
Sure, yes.
Okay, and I will take the impact of AI in academia in general. So, as everyone here is probably aware, there's a large increase in the number of online programs and education going on across the country, and that dramatically increased, obviously, during COVID. And so, even at the University of Louisville and across the nation and across the world, really, there became a reliance on automated proctoring software that was used during testing. So, you have a large class of 300 in a STEM field or something, and people are remote, and you need a way to proctor and avoid any sort of cheating. And at the University of Louisville, as with everyone else, we used a software that was automated, so it was AI-based, and the basis of that software is proprietary, so we don't know how it was developed or anything. But some colleagues from biology and psychology, and one is right here with us, Edna Ross in the audience there. We got together and found some people who'd be willing to share their classes, and we got permission from the students to use their data, and we analyzed whether there was any disparities based on skin tone in the flagging, so the red flags that indicated possible cheating among students. And the reason that we had this concern that this might exist is because the proprietary software, obviously that means we are not privy to how it was developed, and it's based on automated face perception, which has a known issue of often not doing a very good job of detecting faces or recognizing them among people with darker skin, particularly females. So there was reason for us to be concerned. And in fact, we did find and published these data in Frontiers. It came out last month, I think, that in fact the system that we're using at U of L, when we tested it on 4 classes, 4 large STEM classes, we found disparities such that those with darker skin, particularly females, did have a higher number of false positives, red flags, indicating possible cheating. Importantly, in an exploratory analysis that we did after that, Kaylin was a part of this, we reviewed those videos. We had a bunch of people review the videos to see if there was any real cheating going on. And the students that were sort of, when humans were analyzing whether cheating was going on, they were predominantly white and light-skinned. So that raises some real concerns about, obviously, the use of AI in this way, but I just don't want anyone to forget that there are real people on the other side of that who are getting affected. And it's really important to not lose sight of that.
Anyone else wants to chip in on that question? Okay, I'll just maybe add a personal comment that when digital cameras became popular with police force, I had a student work with a police area in Indianapolis to analyze the accuracy of color when someone is bruised in the eye or hit, and for different types of cameras. And we found disparities based on the camera types and skin color. That was many years ago. And this problem has not been fully resolved, because if you're taking evidence, it could really be biased based on the camera and the focus and many things. So thanks for sharing this, but I know it from previous early work that it's a problem. I'll ask Dr. Yampolsky here about the algorithms, since you may have a philosophical perspective about the capability of these algorithms to generalize and maybe to respond to the questions raised by the 2 people about fairness.
So you mentioned that it's a private company, they didn't disclose the algorithm, and that's why we don't know how it actually operates. It's a much more general problem. If it's a deep neural network, no one knows how it operates. The guy who made it doesn't know. The team has no idea. There is a fundamental limit to explainability and comprehensibility of those explanations. If the neural network has 1 billion neurons with trillions of connections, different weights, the whole model is an explanation of how the decision is made. So the answer is, how does it work? Here's a model, look at it. You will not comprehend it. The best it can do is kind of principal component analysis. It gives you top 10 reasons why the decision was made. So it's simplification. It's like when kids ask, where do babies come from? You go, I bought you in a store. It's a lie, or it's too complex for the agent to understand. And we're going to see it across all applications of this technology. It's not limited to just this specific software product.
Can I follow up on that? In this particular instance, based on what is known with the bias that's found in these automated face perception systems, I think that we can drill down. The problem is with the input, so that the training sets of many of these systems are built on faces that are predominantly white male. In fact, many of them were Asians. And so there is a PhD student from MIT, Joy Buolmwini, who looked into this. She's a dark-skinned female, and when she was in school, she wanted to do an interactive robot. She wanted to interact with a robot, and the robot had face perception system in it that was AI-driven, and it couldn't react to her. And she didn't understand why. That wasn't part of her project, so she got her white roommate to interact with the robot for her project, and then delved into what is going on. So the good thing about this is that I think if companies would take the time to review their product before it went out, and took the time and the care to make sure that the training sets were diverse, we would not necessarily have this issue. So I think it's solvable. Would you agree?
You're 100% correct
That's
about
good.
what caused it in this case.
Okay.
It is a very common problem. There is just the data sets are not proportionate. That's obvious. But let's say they trained the system to detect cheating. They had actual truth data. They knew this is cheating, this is not. What the system discovered about what flags a cheating case would not be something we'd know. Like you usually may be looking for eyes,
Right,
or something
right.
like that. The system can detect your heart rate or something change, and that would be the factor they're looking for, and we would never know. There are examples now, and it's interesting with race being a topic. Something like an X-ray, where no human doctor can figure out anything about it. The system is almost perfect at telling the race. Iris scans, similar type of almost magical properties. So you're right about this specific problem completely, but there is more.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me move to a little bit different question, and maybe those who didn't respond will respond in this case. Any personal experience where you felt about that you're dealing with unethical or unfair computer system which is probably driven by AI? Can anyone think of a
Sure.
situation where they encountered it or had doubts about the system?
So something that I think about, I'm new to iPhone. I know it sounds like ancient, right? So I got my first iPhone earlier this year. And so when setting up, Siri and your voice, I found that the options that maybe best represented me were not as developed as they could have been, right? And so being a black man, it made me think, what all is Apple doing to find or have a voice recognition in Siri that best identifies with who I am, right? And a key term that comes to mind, particularly for the black community, is that of ebonics. So you combine ebony and phonics together, and it's not a deviation from standard English, it's its own language, right? And so when you think about that, there are unique vernaculars and pronunciations and how we may articulate certain words in the black community that could be better represented in AI. So I wouldn't consider it to be something that's maybe unethical or an issue, but I saw it as something that in the year 2022, there could be a lot more advancement when something like that, because it's important for people of color to really be able to identify with AI in our day and age.
I consider it a bias rather than maybe unethical. It's probably unpleasant and probably not a smart decision, but yes, but it's the type of thing that can cause biases if they are using this data for other things.
Yes.
And we know that sometimes the data has multiple use, and this is another issue about privacy and things. You may be talking and they may misidentify what you meant and use it to send you an ad that's offensive, or or so I see Kara here is interested.
Okay, I do have one that I want to mention. And when I was thinking about this question, I thought of several different things, but one that's a pretty hot topic and often talked about is very custom newsfeed items on social media. That is a ethical concern, in my opinion, because it can be used not only to customize what you're seeing, but also to take something out of your newsfeed and replace it with something else that it thinks you should be seeing. And I don't know the ins and outs of how it works, but it is definitely a topic that a lot of people have brought up just in online forums, and seems to have a lack of transparency around how it works, which seems to be a primary concern for it.
Do you know who shares this opinion with you? Steve Wozniak, who's the co-founder of Apple. He quit Facebook because he said, I'm tired of seeing targeted things that I'm not interested in, but they assume I am. And so people share with you this.
Yeah, I think some people do like having the option to customize what they're seeing. Like, oh yeah, I don't really want to see that. I want to see this. But other people want to be in control of what they're seeing, or not lose the lack of control.
Yeah. No. And let me maybe comment about the language and the voice. It took forever to have any Siri or a car or anything understand my accent. They are finally able to do it much better with less errors, but I have an accent. I'm born in Egypt. I didn't grow up here. I mean, but so a lot of linguistic thing, whether they are in the audio or in the way you phrase the words, I fully agree that there are biases that can be, in some sense, unethical and can be dangerous, because you may be talking to the car, I mean, in theory, or to a device, and it misunderstands you. So it could get to the safety issue as well as that. So, and I know we have someone who loves safety about AI here, and would you like to comment about safety when it comes to these biases?
So language, you mentioned language specifically. We have a paper out basically saying unambiguous communication in human language is impossible. Most of the time we kind of guess what common sense meaning here is, but there are always multiple interpretations, especially if you're sarcastic, if you joke, if you use normal human communication means. So if you're giving very specific, important orders to the system, you want a better way to communicate. Programming languages are less ambiguous. There is some work on languages which are like provably not confusing, but that's not how humans communicate. So in addition to all the other safety concerns, bias concerns, ethical concerns, even simple communication with AI is not as trivial as you think. And there are great examples. I don't remember most of them right now, but basically if you put together certain combinations of words, the totality is complete opposite of what you had in mind, but it sounds that way to the machine. If you add Egyptian accent, Russian accent, whatever to it, it's just a mess.
Thank you. I'll ask another question. Healthcare is a big issue in the US, and for many reasons. And healthcare now is going through a lot of digitization and automation and analysis, and every company is trying to use, even Epic, who's the leader in now, they are including a lot of AI in their building, which I think there should be an anti kind of law against it, because they are like a monopoly because they have the data. They are pushing AI, and it's built in now for how they recommend it to the doctors. So I work on healthcare AI, whether it's imaging or things, and we have very good results, but it's from open data that it's shareable. Other people can validate it and can test it in most of the time. So any perspective on ethics in using AI for healthcare could be in different perspective. Could be from even admission to diagnosis to treatment. There are so many dimensions that AI is now used in healthcare, even billing, believe it or not.
I have lots of thoughts, but I think there are two issues that come to mind that I think need to be resolved. One is, how well trained are the users of the AI systems, and how well do they understand the limitations of those systems? So I think it was maybe before COVID, I can't remember, I went to the doctor and they said, oh, we have a new system, and they put in all this, the doctor put all this information into me about me or something, and it came up with something, and it was maybe a probability of that I was going to have, I don't know, was it a heart attack? I have no idea what it was. I'm not sure what it was.
I can share that with you.
Okay. Okay. So as I was sitting there, I was thinking, oh, so she's getting some probability number, right? And does she know what that value really represents? And there's a human decision that has to be made at the end. And that is one thing that I think about a lot with AI and healthcare. The other is the quality of the input. So if they're using text analysis and maybe natural language processing or so forth and doctors' notes, we already know that there is a problem in healthcare with human bias that exists. So if a physician is not listening to a black woman who's saying that she's in pain, and they're not noting that in the record, then then the record is what the AI uses to diagnose. They're gonna miss it. Mm-hmm. So it only is as good as the input. So and I guess my feeling is that I'd love to see AI work for good. And I think there are ways, probably computer vision, it could probably detect cancerous cells better than the human eye or something like that. But there are going to be some areas where we need to put on the brakes and use caution. So that's my perspective.
I'm hoping others may comment as well.
Well, I'm married to a physician, and I can tell you that they hate the new systems for inputting data. But largely, it's more of a time issue. They spend so much time with the electronic records. There's actually not a monopoly, so there are different companies. Every hospital has a different one. And it's not clear that it's as effective as the old method. But I think that's something that will be overcome. I think the worry that I'm focused on is that, and it goes to the question of data, but it's a larger issue of semantics or truth, right? This is a problem that we get with AI systems, is that they're very good at picking up on the patterns that are in the data, maybe in surprising ways, in ways we don't even know, but there isn't that check with regard to truth that we need. And this is very evident in the writing samples that we get from GPT-3. Like, it can do a very good job, but it can also lead to gibberish or incoherence. And the question is, how do we check that? How do we make sure that it is working properly? And so if we get too fascinated with the power of AI to perform well under certain conditions, and I don't doubt the functionality, we need to really be careful, because this is how things like bias can creep in if it's in the data or even in the application. So it is something I worry about in the context of healthcare. I mean, I think it can be a very useful tool, and I wouldn't want to deny it, but yeah.
Any other comments?
I can make one, especially in a field as delicate as healthcare when it comes to decision making. If an AI is responsible for a decision, but then maybe a clinician needs to validate a decision, ultimately a question that I'm thinking about when an AI does make a decision is who is actually responsible for the decision. So is it the AI, the clinician who goes with the decision? Is it the program? Yeah, that's my comment.
Anyone else? Because I'll have follow-up questions, and I have comments about this as well. By the way, my physician, after I left, sent me a report saying, tuck, 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 that's the probability of this, you have to take this medicine. But I was in front of you, and we discussed everything, but now the AI gave him that index that's statistical, and he just wants to just protect themselves. It's based on the protection, not based on using their mind. Yeah. Because since the AI told them this, they'll be liable if they didn't recommend it and say you rejected it. So the ethics here is does the AI puts the doctor in a situation where if it gives them a recommendation and they don't agree with it, they are now liable? So I felt offended because we had a discussion, and I explicitly said my priorities that this doesn't need to be addressed by medicine, you know? So I said, either the doctor doesn't trust me or only trusts the AI. And that, I think, can affect healthcare in a sense, because you lose the patient-doctor relation. And but I'll here add another challenge, and I'll ask for questions. in AI training, we use the data from the facts. And we assume that doctors were perfect because this is the gold standard that we are training the AI. So are we now exaggerating the errors that happened in the past? Because they'll do them fast, they will think less, and they'll assume it is correct because it's trained based on what the doctors have done. Any comments? And do we educate the doctors? The education people can think. Do we educate the doctors on new trends of technology to make them capable of understanding it better? For example, I'll give us a challenge here. Not even AI. AI and imaging can create 3D images when you do things. I have yet to see a doctor that manipulates the image in 3D. I heard there are some, but they all look at slices of the image. So think about it. How ethical is it that we as educators do not translate the technology into modifying the way we educate people? I mean, I think this is an ethical challenge that we face collectively. I mean, any perspective on that?
Do you have a perspective on that, since your wife is, or actually I was pointing to Guy, yeah, but either way, yeah.
Not with regard to healthcare, I mean, with my own field, I mean, it's being transformed by AI. So if you just think about brain imaging, right? We had a kind of project where we were doing brain imaging experiments, and we were looking for areas of increased activity. And it was tied to a kind of conception of the brain as a kind of Swiss Army knife with different areas handling different things. And the way it's been transformed is recently we've been using AIs to look at systematic patterns across the brain in a way that we couldn't really conceptualize before, and we didn't have the statistical power to do before. And so now in cognitive neuroscience, what we look at often is the results from applying an AI pattern recognition model and figuring out what's going on. And so it's transformed the way we think of how the brain works. And so I really do want to emphasize that a lot of this stuff is extremely useful. I mean, this is a way in which, and familiar. Often in science, technology leads to advancements, right? And so I do think that that's a really positive aspect, and AI does have that promise. I've also been on a committee, to bring it back to education, where we had to deal with the results of the experiments on responders. And so, you know, how do we deal with it? And we basically had to throw out the implications of responders because of its inherent bias. But then that led...
That's the automated proctoring software. I don't know that I ever said the name. So
right, yeah, I'm sorry. The software, the software you were studying.
Yeah.
So on the committee. But then there was a further problem, which is a sort of socio-cultural problem, and that is, wait a minute, we're getting these false positives. Who's coming forth to the committee and saying, I didn't cheat, right? Is it people with a certain amount of privilege, the time to go see the committee, the time to feel like, or are we missing people that got false positives because of a biased software who were accused of cheating but didn't cheat, but didn't have the wherewithal or feel the power to say, no, I didn't cheat, and feel like anybody would listen to them. So I mean, I think we need to really be careful about the sort of social cultural context in which AI is shaping our lives, in addition to the other stuff.
So we ended up talking more about education than healthcare, which I guess we are educators, so we're kind of biased towards education. But anyone has other comments related to healthcare?
Maybe I should say something positive about AIs just so I don't come off as AI hater or something like that. Right? So typical human doctor has a lot of experience with common problems, but there are rare diseases where they may never see one, they may see one in 30 years of practice. This is where AI would be excellent supplement to a standard technique. Another word of defense for AIs, yes, all human data contains bias. It's also impossible to remove it. You can shift it around, you can change the type of bias you prefer or amounts of it, but it's kind of part of learning. If you don't have any bias in the data, you cannot gain much out of that. So we cannot expect more from AIs than is possible theoretically. And that's why a lot of very good humans are still subject to that same problem.
So along those lines then, that suggests that physicians should not be held liable if an AI system makes a recommendation. Like, it seems to me as though there needs to be a clear delineation between what the AI system suggests. It's one piece of data for the physician to consider, but ultimately it should be the human informed decision that comes out. And I don't think that they should be held accountable if the AI system says, well, it looks like it's this, and the physician decides to override that in any other way that they would or wouldn't be held liable with any information that they had. Like, what I'm saying is, I don't think we should over-rely on the truthiness that the AI system provides, right?
I think it's a little more complicated than that. So if you take the autonomous vehicle example, right?
Oh.
You're going to have accidents, right? In the medical context, you're going to have bias. The question is, statistically, in terms of an evidence-based way, is the bias inherent in the AI going to do a better job? It might harm different people, right? And that's part of the problem with thinking about the issue of diversity. It might do a good job, right? Autonomous vehicles might kill less people, but they might kill different people. They might kill a person walking across the street on a sunny day, right? And so it's a complicated issue in sort of adjudicating that. And I don't think we're at the technology yet, but we are going to get there where an AI doctor may have biases, but may do better, and certainly with certain diseases in certain contexts.
I really appreciate this comment, and I think there is here a key question that I will challenge you, something that I got very interested in. Are all errors equal? This system might be 98% accurate and the other 98% accurate. I joke is I'll have a test and two students made two errors, but the errors may tell me that this student is stupid, didn't study or doesn't know anything, but they did only two errors, and the other are errors that are marginal, so are all errors of AI equal? Should we ethically treat errors in a statistical way? I don't know that we have a statistic lover here, but we might.
I mean, no, all errors are not equal. I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but you know, absolutely not. Some, as you said, are minor offenses, and some are egregious. And I don't know if others feel this way, but my own personal bias is I want AI to be perfect. So I do. I mean, like, I've had this conversation with other people about autonomous cars. I'm uncomfortable with them, and that is irrational, that they probably would be better than humans. And yet, I would not be okay with an autonomous car being involved in a crash. I want autonomous cars to be perfect. And I don't know, it's not rational, right?
We definitely expect more from machines.
Yes.
We would never let a machine get away with what we let humans get away.
Right.
With your desire for perfection, there is a good historic examples. One of the earliest decision-making AIs was tasked with a simple goal: do not make any mistakes. It immediately shut itself off. If it's your car, that might be a problem.
I mean, I'm more comfortable with human error in some ways than I am with
because
machine.
you have a very strong pro-human bias. The only bias you're still allowed to have.
Fair, yeah.
You'd rather have a taxi or an Uber than a self-driving car?
At this moment today, yes, but but it's not that I don't. I need to see some evidence, I think. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm being irrational about it. This is my gut reaction.
So now I'll ask a weird question. So are we ethical in treating AI, or are we just biased based on our background of education, training, experiences? We humans, do we show bias in approving or adopting AI?
I would say so. I definitely think that there is a bias. I think one thing that's needed to advance AI is the work to eradicate like this idea of digital poverty. So when I think about marginalized and poor communities in the United States, consider their access to technology, to the advancement of technology and the use of AI, right? And so if there's not any work being done to kind of mitigate what's lacking in these communities, I think it begins to perpetuate a system, right? Who are the persons who are leading AI? Who are the masterminds behind this work? And if you're not having people of color particularly, or people of low socioeconomic status, or from the LGBTQ community who are then doing the work of AI, then I think that inherent bias continues to be perpetuated in our nation. And so I think the work to be done with Generation Z and Generation A, right, at their age, and the knowledge that they have around technology and coding and the things that really excite them at a young age, I think that's some of the effort that can be done, right, to kind of fill that void of digital poverty that we see in our nation.
Anyone else want to comment?
I could comment. I've recently, just on bias towards AI, I've recently read a survey that said that the top 5 concerns with technology and AI were transparency, accountability, privacy, data integrity, and surveillance. So those are concerns that should be taken into account when discussing the ethics and whether and just how we accept AI in our societies.
Great.
You said it's a weird question, and I think
Yes.
there is a weird paradox we should acknowledge. In AI safety, the biggest unsolved problem is what is known as value alignment. How do we align values of very capable intelligent systems with humanity's values? So in other words, all computer scientists are trying to remove bias from AI, but then our main goal is to instantiate this pro-human bias. I'll stop at that.
Is that feasible? Okay.
I have one more comment about
Yes.
that. I also think the answer to your question is somewhat dependent on the problem, and because there's always a risk-benefit analysis,
yes.
right? And so when the stakes are high, like in autonomous vehicles, I think I want it to be perfect. If it's giving me some judgment about whether
Which movie to watch?
yeah, exactly. Then it doesn't have to be as perfect, right? I mean, it might annoy me if it suggests something that I wouldn't really like, but I don't have as strong opinions about it. But there are some things where it feels like it's not okay for it to not be 100%, which is obviously not possible. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe there are places where AI is really great and some places where AI may not be the best place to implement it, or we have to put some brakes on it and some guide rails to make sure that we're using it appropriately and not, right?
A worry that I have is I think there's a disconnect between our attitude, and could be characterized as a bias towards AI, and our actual use of AI, and our reliance on it. I think it's a perfectly natural thing for human beings to modify their cognitive niche through technology, and I think we've done that throughout our existence. But there is also a kind of romanticism about not relying on technology, certainly when it comes to AI. And I think there's a real disconnect. I mean, we talk about the algorithms, and it's very common to point them out and complain about them, but we often rely on them, right? And kind of enjoy it when, recently this happened to me, tennis started popping up in my TikTok feed, embarrassingly. And I don't really know why, but I really wanted to play tennis again, so I started playing tennis again. And there's something pleasant about that, and it's a very human kind of interaction. And I think there are ways in which certainly it's going to be effective, and I think it's functional in ways that we don't like to admit, but we have to be careful. But I'm not sure our attitude towards it, which I think is infused with romanticism. This goes back to the early days of philosophy of technology with the philosopher Heidegger. I'm not sure that we can really, our biases are built on a conception of ourselves that I don't think is accurate. And I think that's a problem. and we need to worry about how it's going to actually affect us. And that could go for people who worship technology and those that are horrified by it or are Philistine. So I think part of what's going on in medicine and why doctors are miserable is that electronic records were sold as this panacea, and they have not panned out as such. Instead, they're an incredible time suck. And a lot of the data that people wanted to get out of it, they're not getting out of it because of the nature of language and et cetera. And so we need to really, whenever thinking about technology, we need to really, sort of worry about romanticizing it and also worry about our biases against it.
I think you're bringing a very important topic that it goes beyond AI, it goes to digitalization of the world, that people do the work without talking to the users. And that's the design thinking that we preach about, but companies and implementers are usually in a rush. I have a great idea, I'll do it, and they forget why are they doing it, or who is the person who will use it. And I think what you are referring to about the doctor's frustration, they weren't part of the game. They were, and the same for us faculty in many systems that we have to use, and I will not be negative, but whether they are processes with real humans or with computers, if you don't include the user, there will be biases because the developers use whatever biases exist in their mind or in the data they have and forgot about how the users will perceive it. And many times it's closing this loop, from my perspective, is the failure of AI and digital transformation in general in the world that we're suffering from. Is the people, the tools, and the processes. Sometimes you change the tool, in the case of doctor, but you didn't change the process. You tell the doctor you still have to do everything you do and use this as well. So you added you didn't change the process to adapt to the new tool. So I see this as a bigger problem. Is it ethical? But maybe here is not the ethics is the ethic on the management, not on the AI in that case. But in the use of AI could pose the ethical challenges because the way we ask people to use it, not because of the AI itself sometimes. Does this make sense?
It does. I think there's a further, deeper problem, right? Because you're developing software like this, you're not developing it out of altruism to help people or help the world. You're developing it to sell it, right? And so I think a lot of these things, sometimes it's just the data, sometimes it's the way that the software is made, but it can also be because you're trying to sell it and your attitude is, well, if I create this, I can sell it to hospitals and I can tell them it's great. And the doctors aren't really important because they're not in charge. What I need to really appeal to is the people that are running the hospital, and often they aren't physicians, or if they are physicians, they've sold their soul. I mean, it's a complicated thing, right? I mean, the algorithms that we use that are part of Facebook, I mean, it's not clear that was fulfilling a need we really wanted to have. I mean, it was, we're very social human beings, and it's operating on that. But, right, capitalism does require, right, or create things that we haven't had before, and then a need for them. And it's not clear. I mean, there are ethical issues come into play, and we need to think about it constantly. How is this going to deal with human life and how interacting with it? And I will tell you, part of the reason a lot of doctors are quitting right now is the electronic.
I am definitely familiar with this. I see someone, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just to your point about, engaging the user. I mean, I think that's inevitable. It has to happen. I think one of the biggest issues that we've seen historically in the United States have been people in positions of power who have made decisions for a demographic of people in which they do not identify with. And so when you continue to allow that issue to perpetuate itself in the way of AI and in technology, nothing is changing, right? People are still feeling maybe discriminated against or prejudged, not through an actual human agent, but through a robot, right? And so you have to engage the community
you have to give them the opportunity to be responsible and have a stake in this work, because not only are they the ones using AI, right? They are the ones who can better enhance, right, the entire system as a whole. And I think, again, it goes back to that issue. I always tell my students in diversity that the worst thing that we can do is, again, make those decisions for people in which we don't identify with. And so we have the opportunity to fix those problems when it comes to AI, but it's gonna have to happen by engaging the community, collecting that data, right? Getting input and insight from them, training them, giving them the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities where they are now put in positions where they can actually do the work, right? And AI then reflects the full spectrum of diversity and not just pieces here and there.
Can we then use AI to improve our ethics, to recommend to us when AI observes that we are violating some ground truth of ethics, can give us a hint? Take care, you're steering away from the road, or it's not a self-driving car, or take care, these students you are grading are kind of, your grades are biased in this first exam, or tell the doctor this patient is not your typical patient, so beware that you have to think differently. Can we turn the way around and make AI as the ethical crutch for us?
Let's do it.
I mean, but, you know.
Who programs it?
Huh?
Who programs it?
What?
Who's going to program AI to decide what's ethical?
No, you can.
I'll do it. I mean, it's no problem.
Okay, you can do it. No, you can speak on diversity, like by identifying the different cases and differences as a first step. We're not saying, but it could be a first crutch for humans to realize when they are deviating from some standards. I mean,
I think that's a great idea because, you know, at UofL, we are trying to be an anti-racist university. One of the ways that you do that is to always disaggregate data and look at the data based on different demographics and cross sections of demographics to measure how you're doing in blank, right? Whatever it is, it might be graduation rates among different demographics or whatever. That is something that takes time, is valuable and is important and critical. But yeah, would you please design a system so that we could just like have that point us to all the problem areas, like, you know.
So again, it's very easy to give non-controversial, trivial examples, and what you brought up makes perfect sense, but this technology doesn't stand still. In 5 years, it's going to be much more advanced. In 10 years, whatever. At some point, it's human level and beyond. Yeah. So at this point, it's not limited advising you, you know, drink water, not Coke. It's telling you everything what to do. And at some point, we made a decision to program it a certain way. Yeah. Who made that decision? How is the decision made? Because it will propagate for generations.
Right.
I'm working on health equity, for example, with some hospital system. It's not UofL hospital system, just to be clear, but how do you define equity? Is it the outcome? And what if there is a difference in the patient case? There is no two patients come in exactly the same. So it is a challenge even to identify what's fair. And so although I pose the question that it can help us, but I'm posing the challenges that I'm seeing by even defining fairness and equity, because I sat with equity officers and chief medical officers, and we argue. Is the same metric of equity the same for every clinic? Is it, you know, is it the same for, you know, across the board? Is it, so it's really a challenge to, although I pose that suggestion, I realize that it's challenging for us even to evolve into knowing how do we define bias. You know, we simplified it in some of our ethics discussion It could be based on color, based on race. Well, you know, these are easy things. But I read some articles without AI. Some doctor went to her mother and she dressed up very elegantly because she heard her mother was not treated right. And she was a doctor, and the mother is her mother, and she knew that she's old and kind of looked, she's never cared about how she dresses, so she was treated very bad. But when she showed up as a doctor and treated well, everything changed. So,
Yeah, you have to know
so
what.
these biases became in the data. How do you capture that the data we collected had these things that we humans can sometimes recognize, and how do we capture these biases to remove them or to even identify them in the AI? Because I told it from the actual story, but it will be captured in the system about what treatment came to her then and what changed after, and we will never know what was the reason. You see that?
Yeah, so it's only as good as the decision makers, and the input. That makes sense.
So, yeah, but how do we capture these things?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a challenge. Okay, let me move to another simpler issue that we can all probably think about. We are UofL, aren't we? We are the decision makers. How do we make sure that UofL embodies these ethical aspects of AI across the curriculum and across the software we adopt? And I wouldn't go further than that because I'll be fired.
Who wants to touch this?
I'll say one thing.
Who's staying here?
I'll say one thing. So how can we address AI ethics, right, at UofL? So panels are great, but panels also, like this panel, we're also just talking about it.
Yes.
We're not exactly doing anything about it. So maybe a task force and developing ethical principles surrounding the use of AI, specifically at UofL, but also with a very wide range of people on the task force, so advocates for members that are affected by the AI, business, engineers, psychologists, everybody would be, so it would be a very diverse background of people on the task force. Yes.
Yeah. I would add to that, you know, I think about the importance of policy from the standpoint of just governing people. And so having some type of institutional policy where the university is clear on its ethical stance as it pertains to this work, and then how that is then implemented across different academic units, I think will help to provide clarity. I think we need that. Without that, what you have are then faculty and staff who subjectively will make their own decisions as to what they believe to be ethical or unethical pertaining to this work. So at the institutional level, having clarity on its mission and vision around ethics surrounding AI, and then from there, giving each academic unit the liberty and the prerogative to carry out the work themselves as well.
I really think we need some sort of evidence-based approach to the use of AI. I think there's too much fascination with technology, and that leads to errors like purchasing things like Respondus that doesn't work very effectively given the parameters that we want it to work in. And I think too much of the time, technology is bought in order to buy technology. And we need to really think seriously about when it's applied and how it's applied, and to treat it in an evidence-based manner, particularly since a lot of the systems that we're talking about, we're not really going to be completely sure even how they work because of the nature of neural network computing. We need to be really careful in a way. So I'm not saying that it's not something we should look into or we should stand still. I'm not a Philistine. But I do think we need to really think about it. And the software for detecting cheating is a perfect example of how it can go wrong.
Well, and I can comment on some of the follow-up on that. So the previous provost Boehm, did put together a task force, actually, Caitlin, that was to look into the issue of algorithmic bias within the testing. And I was on a subcommittee of that, and it did have representation from all kinds of different people, including students who were on that task force. And the subcommittee that I was on, that was particularly looking at the algorithmic bias, we proceeded to have interviews with, I can't remember now how many different vendors. It might have been 4 or 5. How many was it? 3? 3, okay. 3, I felt like it was more than that. But 3 vendors and we had a set of questions that we asked them about what training set did you use, what evidence do you have that you can provide us to demonstrate that you do not have, that your product will not produce racial or gender disparities. And none of the vendors were able to provide that data. And some were more open to addressing the issue than others. One actually came to the meeting with an ethicist who was going to guide the company moving forward, and it was going to lay out a plan to eliminate bias. So that was encouraging, but it was discouraging in the fact that we never found a vendor that didn't have bias or could show us that they didn't. And so we made a recommendation to the provost to vet any vendor in the future and only use one that could show that there wasn't this type of bias in the data. And we made some alternative recommendations. If you can't find one, then maybe we need to have a big area where people come and take the test in person, or maybe you need to do simultaneous breakout groups or something where a TA, a graduate student, might be watching 10 people while they take the exam. I mean, it's not an easy problem to solve. But at the time, and then leadership changed. So that's sort of where we're at.
Change is inevitable, but change is the only guaranteed thing in life. I think so.
But it's really hard to be here sitting in this spot knowing what I know. And I feel, and again, I'm referring to Edna Ross in the audience, we are trying to be as vocal as we possibly can to protect our students. And I will say one other thing, that the university did put together a training for professors that anyone who used that product is going to have to go through the training that will alert them to the potential issues so that they know that those red flags, there are a lot of false positives, and those red flags are not to be taken as truth, and understand these limitations and the potential problems that it can raise for individual students. So I think since then, fewer people are using the product, so that's good, yes.
Yeah, that's my follow-up question. Are we still using it?
We still have a contract with them, yes. We're finishing out the contract. I don't know how many people are using it, though.
Contracts can be very long.
Yes.
And I'll tell you about the others later. I think I'll give the panel a little bit of a breathing room and allow people from the audience to ask questions, and then we get back, I think. Yeah, please, there is a microphone because there are people online, yes.
This was a very interesting panel discussion, and I thank you for putting it on and for the participants. Those of you who know me, and I think I know everyone on the panel except Randy, know that I am a technology addict. And hi, my name is Edna Ross. I'm a technology addict. I'm the First Step program. My grandchildren had tablets and laptops, at 6 months old or whatever, and my son took it back and said later. So I recently installed a Euro mesh Wi-Fi system in my home, and at that point I found out that I had over 45 devices connected to Wi-Fi, just me. So I am not a technology hater. However, of all the people in this room, I am the one most harmed by technology used in healthcare and also used in education. And I think I'm pronouncing it right, the oximeter that you put on your finger for oxygen levels, articles have come out that 33% of all dark-skinned patients who get that measure get a false positive. So therefore, I can be told that my oxygen levels are fine, and yet I can drop dead 5 minutes later because actually it did not detect the fact that my oxygen levels are low. Now, every time I go into any doctor's office and they clip that on my finger, I say, hello, do you know that I may be in that 33rd percent where you're getting a false positive? And they don't even know what I'm talking about, the people who are taking that measure. Now, I will say that my physician, I love her, and I don't know what I'm gonna do if she ever leaves, because she understands the issue. She's read the same articles I have, and she just says, this is the standard, but I know to check other ways. How many physicians are doing that? When my son was born many years ago, I was told on the delivery table as I was giving birth that I was going to die. I had not been told that before then. It was that you're going to die. We don't think you're going to live through this process. And you can say, well, that was many years ago. But 4 years ago, Serena Williams, the ultimate premier female athlete in the world, was told, no, she was not told she was going to die. She would have died if she had not insisted that something was wrong in her body that the physicians were overlooking. And since she was Serena Williams, she got attention and they found there was a clot that could have possibly killed her. So, like I said, of all the people here, I'm the one, my demographic, my profile is the one most harmed, health-wise even. But let's talk about educational benefits or detriments. Dr. Yoder-Himes teaches very high-level biology courses. And she was discussing with me the fact that she had maybe 6 or 7 African Americans in her class of over 100 students, and yet these students were getting 90% of all the red flags for cheating. And she thought that that was an overrepresentation, and that was the general seed for doing this study. And so we find, and I actually put myself in the position of respondents trying to detect me because there are all these environmental things you're supposed to do. And students and respondents basically says it's not our fault if our software is faulty. It's your fault that you didn't tell your students what to do properly or the students didn't comply. And one of the things that students have to do, the darker skinned you are, the more light you have to have on you to take the exam. So I actually did a study of how much light I would have to have personally on me before the software would clear me for taking the exam. The light was so bright, I bought a ring light, and I had to increase the intensity to the point where it was totally distracting, it was totally annoying, and there's no way I could have sat there an hour with that light directly beamed on me the way respondents wanted me to have it. So, as a Black female, this is what I would have had to do, where Kara could just go in with room lighting and take the exam. Now, that's an unfair onus put on me just because of the software couldn't deal with my skin color and my gender. And the worst thing, wait, there's more before you send me your 1995. There's more. the false negatives. How many white males are cheating and getting away with it because respondents is flagging me, who's just trying to get through the exam, as uncomfortable as it is? And so we actually did some unofficial analysis of the videos, and white males were cheating and didn't get flagged. So those departments and those faculty who think, I'm going to use this no matter what because I'm protecting the integrity of my exam, I'm here to tell you the emperor has no clothes. That technology is not at the point where it's going to detect cheaters properly or non-cheaters properly. And why? Because the software and all technology is developed by humans. And whatever bias or whatever you feel as the person who's creating this technology, your technology is just going to reflect that. And that's a problem we have. For some reason, we think technology is objective. Right. That technology is a better objective tool to use than a person going around. No, that technology just displays whatever biases the developer put in. And at least I can say, I think that person is biased, but with technology, it's all hidden. I don't know until I'm flagged. And Kara had some heartbreaking discussions with students who told her, I was flagged as cheating. I was not, but I am changing my major because I'm not going to stay in a department where the faculty think I'm a cheater. Now, if I was the parent of that child, they'd be changing their school, not just their major. Mm-hmm. So you can take that back also. But, you know, this is a mess because the industry is a mess. That's why it's a mess. And not one of the companies could tell us that they now have a product that is bias-free, not one. And some of them really got very offensive that we even brought up the subject and basically said, it's not our fault, it's yours. So I guess there's not a question there. I just wanted to add to what Kara has so eloquently and Kaylin has so eloquently presented, and the rest of you as well. We need something, there's no doubt about it, but it's not there yet. Mm-hmm. And that people are suffering and being unfairly penalized, even themselves, psychologically themselves. You may not tell me that I'm cheating because you can't, but I know that people think I'm a cheater. Mm-hmm. I know that I've got to set in this environment that's uncomfortable for me to overcome the biases in that software. So thank you very much for having this discussion.
Thank you. I'll have a comment here. The good news and bad news is I don't know of any of our graduates working in these companies. And some of our students who are brilliant are here, so they are listening. Good. And we teach them, by the way, in the undergraduate, legal and ethical aspects of computing. And when we teach AI, we have a big section on AI ethics. So hopefully some of these will penetrate these companies and help them move forward in a more ethical way in how they test and develop their software. So that's the good news. The bad news is we don't graduate enough anyway, so we can't, we can't fill this market. You have a comment here.
I just have a comment on the false negative thing, which I think is brilliant, and that's an important component of it. And having been on the committee where we adjudicate complaints from students, it was heartbreaking when people were accused and may not have. We had examples where people were who seemed very clear that they didn't teach, and that was didn't cheat, and that was a heartbreaking thing to deal with. But there's this other dimension too, which I mentioned at the beginning, which is the use of language models to create papers. Yeah. So who's getting away with that kind of cheating? So I raised it as a kind of theoretical thing in my class this semester. And one of my students kind of sheepishly raised his hand, and he said, my friends have been doing this, not me, my friends, right, have been doing this for 5 years. So So that means that people who have access to a language model can create and cheat on papers, but those who don't can't, and so we're creating another disparity and another unfairness. And it's a brave new world we're entering with regard to the use of AI to detect cheating and to cheat.
Yeah, I think there was another question here. You'll be after him. Okay.
So I want to make a quick observation, or I'll try to make it quick, and I'd like to get your feedback from whoever wants to jump in on it. Dr. Ross made a lot of great points, and one of the things she mentioned is that the industry is a mess, and I think my point is that it's not the industry that's the mess, it's us. When we're talking about AI, as we've heard throughout this panel, nobody is even really talking about what AI is. There's this idea of algorithms, computers, robots. Is it a smart thing that learns on its own, or is it just a simple bit of code that somebody puts in? I think this is one of the issues that was being brought up with the whole case about Lambda. For those of you who are aware of that, there's a AI chatbot that one of the developers at Google claims is sentient, and they claim that they weren't making that claim because they really think it's sentient, but really they want people to start thinking, how would we know? What does sentience mean? What is an AI really? And what rights do we have over it? So we talk a lot about ethics, but the one thing that I think we're missing is it's like the ethics of what this technology can do for us. But the way that we're talking about it hints at the problem that we have, which is that we're talking about it as a tool. We're talking about a child that's learning from us in theory. We're talking about something that, in a true AI, it's a black box. It's going to be programmed to go look at data and create its own way of approaching that data and using it to solve problems. And it's learning that from us, not from me or you, but all of us. It's going on the internet, it's looking at wherever we're pointing it, and it's looking at all these huge data sets that are, in theory, an aggregate of what we believe as a culture. Not humanity, but Western, educated, weird, essentially, data sets, that kind of stuff. And if you look in this room, there aren't a lot of African Americans in this room. So what's it going to learn from that data if that's what it's learning from? There's not a lot of diversity in our country at the highest levels, and so there are a couple of questions that come to me. One is, is it ethical to even look at it as a tool? Is it going to really represent the values of any one person when we can't even be honest with ourselves about what our values are? And how do we use this technology in a way that's not only ethical to us as the people that are benefiting from it, but more and more as it learns and it starts to be capable of much more, what's going to be ethical for it? How much responsibility do we owe to the technology? That's all.
Thank you. I know of someone there is eager to respond.
Go to my Google Scholar. There is 200 papers, multiple books addressing all those issues. I don't know why more people don't buy my books. They should. It's all in there. I have no solutions, but I point out all the problems.
That's why.
No, but let me add one thing. The fact that technology is diverse, there are many ways to create AI, different levels of complexity, different levels of training, different levels of self-adaptation with time. So the technologies exist, and they are not that bad. We are relying on many semi-educated people to create the technologies because the market, anyone who says, I know AI or I know to code, is hired. And why? Because they're cheaper. It's that simple. Our graduates mostly work outside of Louisville because the market here cannot pay them the salaries that they deserve. So you see, the market and the business is a problem more than the knowledge and ability to address some of these issues. I had a graduate minor in economics, not business. So I have to look at the problem for a longer term, more than at least 3 years. And no one in the business addresses things, and I told this to my friends in business schools, you are missing the point. You're teaching people to make profit quarter by quarter, and a CEO will get a bonus when they fire people, and the next one starts from scratch after losing all what they learned, you know. So we have to realize that there is a societal issue that is causing this problem. Is we don't have, for example, like people who build bridges have to have a certification, but people who build AI don't have to be certified. And I'm not recommending they should be, but at least you should be critical in knowing who is developing what. And we as buyers, I assure you that no one in the university ever asked anyone in computer science and engineering about any software they bought. Never happened. And I'm not saying this as a bad thing about the university, because this is the standard even in other companies. So they are following the normal standard. They don't look at the experts, they look at the brochure of the seller, how glossy, how fancy it is. So that's an ethical problem that's beyond the technology. It's about how we treat technology and how we buy technology, how we adopt technology.
Yeah.
So I think the ethical issue is us, you know? And I'll stop, there is a question there, so. Yeah. I'm sorry for taking time from the panel.
Yes, my name is Derek Osborne. I'm a computer science engineering student here at JV Speed. And my particular question is coming from the industry's perspective on how we deal with the ethics of AI in our intelligent systems. Because as you may know, the technology industry is one of the most competitive industries in the world, as problems are developing, evolving every single day. The competitiveness between not just our country, but other international nations and the different technology companies they have. It's every day you're competing to release your software product to industry as quick as possible. And that comes with certain opportunity loss, and some of that is the ethics that are behind these AI systems, such as building proper data sets or even releasing a truly marketed product. Like when we make claims that the AI is fully sentient, my question is to panelists, how do we draw the line, whether it be with government or through panel certificates, how do we draw a line before we step over the boundaries and say, hey, industry, you need to slow down on how you release your products, but do we also take back some of that energy in terms of our economic power, maybe as like the United States? How do we compete with global markets that don't share our same ethical standards for AI or technology?
Thank you. I'll see if anyone, I have an answer, but a very short one, but
So a lot of it depends on how difficult the problem you're addressing. If it's like Manhattan Project, you need trillions of dollars, you need government involvement, regulation might work. You can pass certain laws, and maybe even internationally it would make sense. You can monitor large amounts of compute, how it's used. If it's something you, her, they can do in your garage, on your laptop, regulation is meaningless. You know, computer viruses are illegal. Spam is illegal. Copyright file sharing is illegal. How is that working out, right? So it feels good to go, let's form a committee, we'll establish ethical guidelines for UofL. Never mind that every other university, every nonprofit has their own set of guidelines which are competitive, which don't match, nobody reads them. There is a survey paper of 100 of them, and they're all different, and it's like 3 laws of robotics, you know, who cares? You can pass a law, make it illegal to make bad AI. You'll win an election, but you didn't solve any technical problems. So you want to be realistic about what works and what doesn't work. A lot of times, commercial, financial incentives might help. You identified this huge problem. There is a market of millions of users who want software which is not biased against the users, and no one is developing it in a capitalist society? Why? Do we have entrepreneurship? Do we have business school? Do we have people who want to make money? CEO right there. You're passionate about it. You want to make it happen. Recruit our students, get funding. You're a billionaire, and you solve the real world problem.
That's a great answer.
Question?
Yeah, I mean, there are some bills that have been written, for example, that might, it's not going to limit the production of the systems, but it might limit who gets to use them. So there was one bill that was being discussed that would have prevented, or that would make it illegal for any federal government agency, which essentially would include a place like UofL, because we do trickle down receive federal dollars, to use any automated face recognition system in any product that we use. So that would eliminate the automated proctoring. That would mean we wouldn't be able to use automated facial detection around campus, which, by the way, we don't. And I specifically asked or at least I hope we don't.
No, we have a project that we don't. And
Good, because that was something that I had asked our new police chief to commit to. So there might be some ways to curb it, but that's not always like the solution. Or could we do that in banking? Can we make sure that banks are not? I don't know. They're not going to let. That's a mess. Anyway, yeah, I'll stop.
You made the banking comment.
Yeah.
About many years ago, I almost published a paper, but I removed the title I wanted. Was, do you trust your mortgage banker with data mining? And I showed in that paper with some colleagues that just changing the parameters changes the decision.
Oh.
And they don't know about the tool. They can use it under different parameters. So we were aware of this maybe about 15 years ago. Yeah. And we published it, but I called it something simpler, not to offend them. I needed a mortgage,
Right. Right.
I'm not sure that I have the solution, and I am fairly cynical. I think technology is a cat that gets out of the bag repeatedly and spreads, and does so for all sorts of socioeconomic reasons. I would advocate one kind of solution that is different than the ones being talked about here, and the ones being talked about here are pretty top down, right? Well, let's get committees, let's get administration to handle it. I think another way that's more bottom up is education, and I think this is the important thing, right? If people are selling software that doesn't work, and in particular is biased against marginalized people, we need to shout that that's the case so loud that people learn about it, and that is the way in which we fight this, rather than try to sort of preemptively in a top-down way. If people are trying to sell autonomous driving vehicles as being super safe, we need to find out whether they are in fact, and then if they aren't in fact, which actually it seems like they aren't, then we need to actually, we need to do that. So what we need is what a university like this does, and in particular a university like the University of Louisville, which is an R1 university with 1% of the 1%. And we need to educate people, get people thinking about it, get people talking about AI and ethics, and that is the way to manage it, because I really am suspicious about the top-down.
I was told we have time for one more question, but I have two requests, so I'll ask them to be brief. So I'll take the two, one and one there, okay? So take the two, yes, but be brief in your question, please. And we may ask the two questions before we get answers, because there will be relations.
Yeah, hi, my name is Daniel. I just want to know about the things like we are talking about the biasness. Like as a word, AI is artificial, like we are human are biased towards a lot of things. So I want to ask like is algorithm is like a child, what you teach them. So what do you think about, is the data is biased or is like algorithm is biased? And the second question I just want to ask, like, are we ready to adopt the automation? The time is correct, like the automation, because people are not asking like a lot of things like, should we need this technology right now or maybe 5 years or 10 years later? Just want to know. And the second thing is like about the doctors, like we are talking about the healthcare, the doctor have an experience and we are using the technology AI, but we are using this thing, but like the doctors are already using a technology like X-rays or imaging techniques to find and detect this thing. Just want to know about this thing.
Okay. We'll get the other question first to see if there are any overlaps to say because of time.
Hi. Mine's less of a question, more of a general challenge. It's great to educate people, it's great to talk about it. Problem is getting people to actually care. And, you know, as a white male who's an engineer, it's easy for me to, in general, say, it doesn't affect me, I don't care. You got to get society as a whole to care about the problem, and you have to get the people who design systems, develop AI, develop software as a whole to care either through motivation or recognizing this is a problem and convincing society as a whole.
Thank you. These are two different, so let's someone maybe respond to the first one, because we answered partly on that. I think you may have a good response about readiness.
About what?
Readiness for automation.
I can address the last question, I think.
Okay.
So if you want to learn why you should care, you specifically, realize that while today it may only affect certain marginal communities, it will affect everyone 100% with a lot more impact in the future. No one will not be impacted by future AI. I don't know what more encouraging I can say to make every single person care as much as possible.
Well, that's a strong statement, thank you. The other comments on this one, just so that we can move to the first question? I will maybe add a comment that as Dr. Yampolsky said, no one is immune. It may affect you because people who attempt to remove biases, we know people are complaining about reverse bias. So software can even have reverse bias if people overreact. So it could affect you. So the best, I think, is to have no bias, you know, from the beginning. You understand? To be cognizant that your software should have no bias and should even be, as much as possible, explanatory about what it did. And there are a lot of research on explanatory AI, and we can talk about this forever. But I fully agree that the biases will affect everyone.
I would just add, if someone isn't, if there needs to be motivation found, I would reiterate what I said earlier. Don't forget, there are real people on the other side who get affected by this. So, you know, I know that I can imagine that if one is in engineering and you're dealing with data, it feels very separate from the human part of it. But the implementation of AI in our world has real implications on people's lives. And I don't mean people in general, I mean individuals. And so even just remembering what Dr. Ross said about her personal experience, or the one that we referred to, the student that was individually affected. I mean, I hope that horrifies you and that it motivates you, right? Like maybe we need to do a better job of telling developers about these individual stories to remind them how important this is. But.
So I'm going to tackle the first question a little bit. And I think there might be a problem with the way we talk about AI. And this is this, we kind of think of it as in terms of personhood, right? And not that it is an interesting question and that there might be ethics related to AI. But what I'm worried about, and I think the malicious part that we need to be really concerned about, is structural and societal rather than just cognitive biases that a particular AI might have. So it's the data, it's the algorithms, it's the role that it plays in our society. I think what Roman is talking about is a worry, right? It's going to become integrated, and it's going to change things, and it's going to, like when we're talking about like the role that the phone is playing in our lives in determining our desires and what we spend our money on, what kind of entertainment we look at, how we interact with it on a daily basis. Yeah, there might be biases built into it, and certainly into the algorithms, but it's also our interaction with it, right? Both at a personal level, at an economic level, at a societal level. And while I don't have the answers to that, we need to think about it. We need to think about it in those terms. And I think that is a problem that we're having difficulty with. So, I mean, I guess the answer is to think about it more creatively, but I do think that's a problem. Like, I mean, when you're talking about the engineering, right, well, one fix you're going to need to have is have more diverse engineers, right? I mean, we have a real problem in the STEM fields. I mean, particularly in computer science, like I've seen numbers where it's pretty interesting. Like initially when people, or in the early days, there was much more gender parity, and then it was lost over time. Sure. And that might have...
I observed that because I was part of it. I noticed it personally. It really changed.
And there's all sorts of complex factors for that. And so we need to recognize it. We need to recognize the structural problems. And if we think too much about AI and we think of it too much in terms of an individual cognitive agent, we're missing all of the ways it's shaping our life as it stands and as it goes on.
There are two quieter panelists here. I would love to hear from them before we close. And Randy, maybe give him a chance. He's been more quiet than you.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll just close by just saying, you know, I think all that we've kind of commented on and discussed, you know, it's motivating to know that there's a lot more work to do, and I think we're definitely being proactive in our thoughts and our ideas and our approaches. And so I hope that from these discussions, you know, we all leave with a motivation to have a personal commitment to this work and understands that, you know, even though it affects, you know, one directly, it affects us all indirectly. So yeah.
Yeah, my final thoughts on this would be that it's important to acknowledge that AI does have its limitations, but it certainly has its place as well, and that when we think about it and we want to create it, we have to think about who we're creating it for and its social impact, and we also need to just be cognizant and conscious of the effect that it has and to mitigate the problems associated with it.
Okay, I will add one more question, not waiting for an answer. You know, what if we create like an AI vetting lab? So before the university buys any AI, that we have a group of technical people and ethical people vet the software as a principle before we buy it.
With diverse users?
Yeah. Rather than be the lowest bidder or the whatever, or the most elegant bidder, you know.
Yeah.
Think about it.
I like that idea.
Maybe, I know that you don't buy any electrical equipment without a stamp of approval from UL. It's not UofL, you know. So we can have a UofL stamp of approval on products we buy. We don't have to solve the world's problems, but
make sure we aren't contributing to them. I like that.
But that's a thought that out of what I heard, I thought maybe we may come up with a plan rather than just cry all the time.
Yeah.
Because tears have limits.
I like that.
You know? And on a positive thing, I want to thank you all. I really enjoyed it. I hope the audience did. And thank you so much. I guess that's it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You did a great job.